Hello, I'm Alex Bybee, and I'm very excited to welcome you to our annual Sun Youth Forum panel discussion. Today we are joined by 6 room representatives who were elected by their peers and are eager to share their thoughts on some very important topics. But before that, I want to take you back to 1956 when Hank Greenspun founded the Sun Youth Forum. His desire was to give young people the chance to voice their opinions in a setting that allows them to be heard. Fast forward over 50 years later, Hank Greenspun's Sun Youth Forum continues to provide the youth with this opportunity. The event assigns students into groups where they debate topics ranging from racial disparities in our prison system to the war in Ukraine. So now, let's meet our students.
Hi, hello, my name is Kayla Oliver. I represented the American Room, and I'm a junior at Desert Pines High School.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kayla. Glad you're here. Aileen.
Hi, my name is Aileen Ramirez Barraza. I go to Veterans Tribute Career and Technical Academy. I'm a senior, and I did Home in Nevada this year, but this is actually my second year on the panel.
Wonderful. Thank you, Aileen.
Hi, I'm Jansen. I'm a senior at ATEC, and I'm the representative for Law and Crime.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jansen. Over to you.
Hello, my name is Christian. I am a junior at Sierra Vista High School, and I was in the room covering teen topics.
All right.
Hello, my name is Anna. I'm a senior at Veterans Tribute, and I covered Around the World.
I'm Cesar Lopez. I'm a senior at Veterans Tribute, and I was in School Days.
Wonderful. Well, we're glad that you're all here. And as we said before, you've all been chosen by your peers to represent their perspectives on these very important issues, and I'm looking forward to a robust discussion today. But before that, we want to give you a glimpse into this year's Sun Youth Forum.
For over 50 years, the Sun Youth Forum has given high school students the opportunity to discuss real-world issues with the community leaders. Recently, students gathered at Ed W. Clark High School to take part in this annual event.
I think it's a great opportunity. There's a lot of things that we want to discuss with our community. I'm almost 18, a lot of the other people are almost 18, so we get a vote, and it's important to talk about the issues that really, really matter to us. And I think having a moderator that's experienced really gives us the opportunity to learn so much more.
In 1956, Hank Greenspun founded the Sun Youth Forum with the idea that the younger generation should have the ability to share their opinions with adults, which was unheard of at the time. Thanks to the Sun Youth Forum, teens are engaged and making positive changes in the community, and teachers agree.
I'm super excited that the kids are here. I think Sun Youth Forum is really important to give teenagers a chance to feel like they're heard, and I think it's really nice to have a lot of the local community people here to hear their ideas, because as teachers we get to hear it all the time, like in the classroom, and we get to give them a voice, but I don't think as a community they get a voice very often. So the kids are really pumped. When they found out the questions, they were really excited to be heard about this, so I think it's a wonderful opportunity for them.
These high school students are happy that the forum gives them a chance to see that their thoughts are being heard.
Because as kids, oftentimes people don't take us as seriously because we're young and we don't have much knowledge or experience in the world, but they're asking us questions about our seriously issues and things that we actually do need to talk about more and more. And I think that a lot of things nowadays we're trying to adapt from being in our old-fashioned ways. And so I think it's really incredible that we're getting the chance to talk about how we're feeling and how we think that it will affect us in the future.
Professionals in the community are also excited by the fact that so many young people are interested in formulating a better future.
And the kids are just terrific. They're so interested, they think about things, they hear what other people say, but they have very strong opinions. And they realize that they have a voice. And this gives them an opportunity to have a voice that I think is just terrific, really fun.
So I just think it's fabulous. I enjoy every year listening to the students and what their opinions are, knowing that in a few years, some of them will be turning 18, they're going to be voters. So they're going to be determining the future of our country. So it's good to hear their opinions.
The Sun Youth Forum has succeeded year after year at giving students a voice. And as Hank Greenspun said, listen to the youth, for theirs is a wisdom untainted by cynicism, unbounded by pessimism, and full of bright hope for the future.
As you can see, it was another eventful Sun Youth Forum with many amazing high school students getting involved. Luckily, our room representatives here today are ready to expand on these discussions. So now, let's get started. We're going to turn it over to Chanton to talk about the Law and Crime Room. I understand there were many issues that came up. We only have a few minutes today, so we'll stick to the two that were the most robust in your room. So let's hear it.
Awesome. So the two most robust in my room personally was the decriminalization of drugs, whether or not we should decriminalize drugs in general, and reproduction rights, the constitutional, like whether it's constitutional, whether people should have it in general. When it came to the decriminalization on drugs, the general consensus that we found was that yes, it should be decriminalized, but there were many sides to that. We did have a few people that did not necessarily agree with that conclusion, and we had people in the middle. For those that were for it, the general idea behind it was abuse is not something that you choose. It is not your choice to be abusing this drug. It's not your choice to be addicted, right? And if the general purpose of our prison system is to help rehabilitate these people, then actually decriminalizing the drug so we don't have excess prisoners for something that realistically shouldn't be seen as a crime, it makes no sense to actually solving their problem at all. One thing that we also saw was that again, our prison system is already crammed as it is, and adding more people into the system makes no sense. And realistically, we wanted to explain that there's a difference between legalization, right, people just being able to do drugs freely, and decriminalization, right, not viewing it as a crime. When you have a drug offense, getting a job is incredibly hard, and it makes these rough situations even worse. But when you decriminalize that drug, you get them the help, and you help them to get a better economic standing. For the people that were in the middle, it was a thing of we can have these rehabilitation programs without necessarily decriminalizing it, which I felt was a good stance, right? It was right in the middle, and I think they agreed with stuff on both sides. For the con, the main thing that they were against was decriminalization is a way to lead to legalization, right? We don't want to go to legalization. That is just abusing drugs. And they generally felt that without the punishment of our prison system, people would continue to abuse these drugs, and it would keep them in these systems where they're impoverished and suffering.
Well, we have a robust topic on the table, decriminalization of drugs. You heard various perspectives that Chanton brought with him from his room on complete decriminalization to rehabilitation to keeping the status quo. So let's hear from the group. What are your thoughts on this issue? Did it come up in your rooms, or what is your perspective on this issue? And is there a connection to the topics that you discussed? So who'd like to jump in first? All right, let's hear it.
So yeah, the Prison to Pipeline, it was a school to prison to pipeline, like little thing, where we talked about how there are things where students are going to like JAG Academy, which is in my school, where they're trying to become more civilized and stop doing what they were doing, usually for like drugs, usually weed in schools. And we talked about how that also happens in like actual prisons and actual jails, is where we have this problem where we think drugs are like a leading cause for people to be in prison. And it's a cartel issue, it's a drug dealer issue, it's a issue that we need to solve. And a way that we thought to solve it was to somewhat make these drugs illegal, but also limit the amount of over-the-counter drugs that we're giving out to like people who need it. We need to be more organized in how we're giving out these over-the-counter drugs, because those can become drugs that are on the street and it's sold for, money and stuff. So.
Okay. Christian.
Yeah, those are really good points. In my room was team topics, and definitely substance abuse was one of the main points that we did come across. One thing that I feel like is definitely connected to the whole substance abuse issue within, the youth and academia is definitely the regulation of certain drugs, and also the access and the accessibility to substances. There are one of the big points that was made was the systemic architectural design that comes with liquor store locations and where they're at and things like that. Someone in my group definitely brought up a good point that a lot of liquor stores are located in very heavily minority-dominant areas of the city, which is why you see areas like North Las Vegas, which is a heavily minority, like Hispanic and Black populations, that you see more of that drug abuse and substance abuse, whereas in areas like Centennial Hills or possibly like Summerlin, where you have less and less of that minority population, there's less of that kind of issue that's visible on like a database scale.
Okay, so we're hearing about the impact of these conversations on students in the classroom. You're sharing a little bit about maybe how our communities were developed and the influence that has on access to these substances. Is there a closing thought on the topic of decriminalization of drugs before we move to the second topic in this room? Yeah, Caesar.
So I know we're talking a lot about decriminalization, how we were kind of built to end up resorting to these drugs, but I also want to talk about the reason behind why we take them. We don't just go to alcohol because it's there. We don't just take LSD because it's there. We take it because we're looking for a way out. Making drugs harder or easier to obtain isn't going to change the fact that people are going to want them because they're tired of the way their life is. If you give them the opportunity to actually make their lives better, if you give them less of a reason to take drugs, then regardless of whether it's illegal or legal, you will see drug use go down. If people are happy with their lives, there's no reason to take drugs.
Well, I appreciate that, Caesar. I think that's a really profound comment to close out this discussion. I do want to give the last word to Chanton on this topic because you were the room representative. We won't have time to get to reproductive rights, but we're going to transition to that topic here in a second with Kayla. So give us the last word from your room on the decriminalization of drugs conversation.
I think the way that drug and drug offenses are seen, I think they're completely correct. It disproportionately affects minorities. And I think that if we want to help to solve racial injustice and to help improve our prison system, decriminalization is the best path forward.
All right. Well, appreciate your insights on that. We're going to move on to a topic, Chanton, that I understood also came up in your room, in the law and crime room, but also came up in your room, Kayla, where you were talking about issues in America. One of those is reproductive rights. So let's dive into that discussion. What were young people saying in your room? Were they supportive, in the middle, against? Let's hear all the perspectives.
Well, for ours, it was divided into two, pro-life and pro-choice. It was, of course, overwhelming of pro-choice, but the pro-lifers did have a room to speak. We did allow them, everyone facilitated a place where we can all feel comfortable. So coming from the pro-lifers, it was mostly about how religion is kind of embedded into having children and having a big family. They also talked about a lot of how they should have the right to an abortion during a rape, but when it comes to just abortions for everyday life, they shouldn't be allowed. When we talked about pro-choice, we mostly talked about how it kind of goes against the Constitution and how we should have the right to our bodies, as Roe v. Wade was just overturned not too long ago. We also went on to talk about how women should have the right that any other person should have to pick what they want to do. It's not only a case of if they're raped or if they're in a horrible relationship and they don't want to keep the child. It's more of a thing that if you don't have the facility to have a child, if you're poor, you don't have the money to birth a child in America, then you should have the choice to an abortion. And one of the biggest problems is how much it costs to have a child. It's running up to $12K for having just a baby in a normal hospital without insurance. If you have insurance, of course, it's great, but there's a lot of people who don't have insurance, and it targets minorities mostly. So that was probably the two sides that we had in that conversation.
I appreciate you bringing all the perspectives to the conversation, and certainly I see a lot of desire to jump in. This is a timely topic and an important topic, so I see Aileen. Let's hear from you on this.
Yeah, so, the abortion argument has been happening for quite a while, and something that I see, even when you were speaking right now, it's just that the two sides that are involved in this, they never really have a single point of contention that they're arguing over. The pro-life side, it's mostly about abortion is murder, or you should raise a family, or you shouldn't be having sex if you're not going to, be capable to raise a kid. But then also on the other side, the pro-choice argument is, if you are in that situation where you cannot handle having a child right now for financial reasons, or even just your situation is not permitting of that, then you should have the right, or you should have the ability to get rid of the child, And that's something that I see a lot in these arguments is people are arguing for hours and hours and hours over two different things, whether or not it's murder or whether or not it's morally right or whether or not it's legally okay and if it should happen.
Okay, thanks, Aileen. I see Christian wants to jump in.
Yeah, for sure. On that same topic, I feel like one thing that has to be talked about more is kind of the issue revolving separation of ideology versus the realistic general welfare. it's very important, especially like in our day and age, to respect the opinions of others and be very open to diversity, whether it has to do with race, gender expression, sexual orientation, all of these different kind of differentiable factors that we're seeing in society now, where people are more open about who they are and all of that sort of thing. Making sure that we're representing people for their kind of personal decisions rather than, infringing upon another's choice is something that has to be more talked about, and it could possibly be a consensus that should be made, like Aileen was mentioning, maybe finding that point of contention to be, well, people should have the right to choose what they do, because either way, one side is still choosing and the other side is also still up to choosing. Making the pro-choice, the assumption that the pro-choice argument is infringing upon the pro-life argument and vice versa, is it going to get us any further?
Well, I understand, Kayla, that in addition to reproductive rights, there was another important theme in your room, which was America. So let's hear about the other topic that dominated the discussion in your room. At
The other topic that has dominated our room was homelessness. We talked about it for the longest. We have the most notes on it. So homelessness has a lot of factors that go into it. One of the biggest ones were drugs. Drugs being one of the things that make people homeless. It's either you're addicted to it, or you're going out to buying it, or you're selling it and you get stuck into the prison system. We had a lot of people talk about how they had experiences with family members who had went through those types of things, where they're going to go get drugs wherever, from a drug dealer, from a cartel, from over the counter. And that problem is what's happening with homelessness. It's just, we're having homeless people who are getting money, like they're sitting on the street, they have their sign and they're getting money from people, but they're not spending it on things that can actually help them. But one of the other main things is, how do we get them to that help? Homeless people, we know, don't have access to phones if they don't know where to get a free phone, which there are places to get free phones, but if they can't see where that is, how are they supposed to get there? How are they supposed to learn this knowledge? That we're trying to reach out to them and tell them, okay, here's a different option for solving this problem with you. You can always go to a nearby homeless shelter. There's a lot of resources for you to stop being homeless and to help you become, back into society. That was a really big topic that we discussed.
Any thoughts from the back row? We have time for one perspective. Go ahead.
In our room for Around the World, we also did discuss homelessness. It's a very big problem within not just America, but everywhere. And we were talking about nonprofits, and I know that seems a little bit weird, but we were talking about how there are different nonprofits that are set to help rehabilitate different people who have gone through really difficult situations, and homelessness is definitely one of them. And it was talking about the idea that so many people fund these nonprofits, correct, but then they don't use the money in a very effective way. And the fact that there's no actual help, it's just there to build a building and that's it. And we were looking about how there might be some instances where instead of just building a property, that there would be classes, there would be different ways where we could actually help them one-on-one instead of just giving them an overlaying idea of get out of homelessness. That's not really going to help them if you're not giving them the right resources, the right education, because some of them start off as kids. They can't get a job if they don't know English. They can't get a job if they don't know basic skills. And instead of just making a building, having those classes can be a lot more effective. And that's in a perfect world, and I know that that is, but that's something that we can start doing so that effectively we can do that one day.
Well, I see that a lot of folks want to jump in on this topic, and certainly it's an important one, even in our own backyard here in Las Vegas. Unfortunately, we've reached the end of our time for Kayla's room, which was on America. So we've covered law and crime, we've covered America. We're going to head to Caesar to talk about school days. So let us know what's on the minds of young people as it relates to school.
The idea of the Sun Youth Forum was that the youth were supposed to have minds untainted by cynicism, but that seems to have been decidedly refuted, as many of the youth are now angry and unable to solve the problems that they see right in front of them. In school days, there was basically no disagreement. We all agreed the district has a problem, and we know what the problem is. We don't have resources. Our teachers don't get paid enough. Some of us can't even afford AP or dual credit fees. We don't have great classes. Some of our classes don't even make sense to take. And the people in private schools get double the resources we do while we sit in the public system withering away. And our average ACTs last year, 17. 51st, including DC, we're angry. We're angry that we don't get to do anything about this. We're angry at a superintendent who doesn't care about us and an administration who doesn't bother to help us. That's all there was.
All right, so we've heard loud and clear from Caesar on the energy and sentiment in the room, not just on ideas about what's wrong, but also the energy around how students feel about wanting there to be solutions and wanting there to be solutions quickly. So let's hear from all of you. You're all students. I'd love to find within the limited time we have to hear from each of you on this topic. So let's start over there with Chanton. I see you want to get on the conversation.
Definitely. I think when we look at our system, we're not the best funded, right? We have a lot of stuff here in Nevada where I think one thing that we talked about, especially when we legalized marijuana, is the taxes on legalizing that would go to public education. It never has, right? We have the funding to pay our teachers more. We have the funding to give our classrooms more resources, but we have yet to actually act upon that. The issue isn't necessarily our district itself, but it's also with how our state allocates its funding.
Okay, so I hear from you a funding issue, not just amount of funding, but how it's allocated. And that was also something that Caesar had mentioned in terms of inequities and funding between public and private schools. Who wants to jump in next? Yes, Aileen.
So this was actually a huge topic in my room. I think it took basically the remainder of the second half of our day. One issue that we see a lot in education is just that we have policies that are changing all the time. Like last year we had the minimum F policy, which was a major point of contention in my room, which was school days last year. Not only that, we also had that changed, and then also we are having the weights of grade change constantly. Like every single year, I think I've had a different amount of weighting per thing. And that's just very hard for students to adjust to. And that's something we talked a lot about in our room. But then the biggest thing that we talked about is how we need to trust our teachers more. Because those policy changes and all this standardization, it's all coming from a space where it's just oh, we need to instruct teachers on how to teach. No, you don't. They have master's degrees. They are highly educated and they know what they're talking about. You need to give some more trust into teachers, and they know how they're best going to work their classrooms. Some people don't work well with that 5-day late policy. Some people don't work well with that 50 minimum F, and some people don't even do summative test scores.
Okay, so an additional thing that's been thrown on the table is inconsistency. Things are changing at the policy level for teachers, they're changing for students, and that constant adjustment is challenging for the school system and for those in the school system to adjust to. I see Christian is eagerly wanting to jump in on this topic, so let's hear from you, Christian.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the biggest things I think, stepping back, I guess behind the curtain of what the problem is really about is we have a consensus that education is important and is necessary for society as a whole. One of the biggest things that people pride themselves in America is you come to America, you get a great education. My dad's an immigrant, my grandmother's an immigrant from Mexico, and coming here, the culture is you come here for the American dream, you come here to educate yourself. And when you come here and, as a second generation student, it's interesting to observe how much the promise isn't being fulfilled, in the reality being that the education system is not built to support all of those real, important values that come with education. So one of the biggest things one of my room came up with in Teen Topics was that schools are built to create workers and not thinkers, and that mentality is something that I think a lot of our student populace will agree on, is that we're not being taught how to live the real world, live in real life. All of my senior friends, none of them ever taught about how to do taxes. These real problems that we see aren't being addressed, and instead, like Aileen was mentioning, the inconsistencies within education, one of the biggest ones is that we're being consistent with systems that don't work and are not moving ourselves towards a direction that's going to make anything better in the long term.
Yeah, so we've heard from several of you. I know, Caesar, you kicked us off. Aileen, you've talked, and so have you, Christian and Chanton. I do want to point out that three of you, Christian, Aileen, and Caesar, these topics were sort of consistent across your rooms. Is that correct?
Yes.
I mean, education came up regardless of what the global topic was in your room. This was something that was consistent across the board. So I think we can spend some more time on this particular issue. So we've heard schools are producing workers, not thinkers. We've heard funding adequacy and how the funding is allocated. We've heard changes in policy. We've heard anger. And we also heard, Caesar, though, that some of the anger is that students see the solutions and they want them implemented. So can we talk a little bit about what some of those solutions that were discussed are, and then maybe spend some time as a group talking about those solutions so that the leaders who are listening to this can think about how they can implement them urgently?
Okay. The number one thing, for God's sakes, give us more money. All of our schools are missing teachers. All of our schools are missing the adequate resources to fund programs. All of our schools are facing huge budget issues, and their test scores are dropping. Their academic achievement is dropping. They can't do anything about it because, oh, the purse is empty. Our number one consensus, please, please, increase the funding for the public education system. Second, as I believe Aileen pointed out, we do need to trust our teachers more. Granted, there is a level of standardization that does need to occur, or else accreditation of high schools becomes impossible since there's no way to know what we learned. But it's important that we allow teachers the freedom to teach how they know their students need to be taught. That our teaching needs to become more adaptive to us on behalf of the teacher rather than a rigid textbook that is brought down up on high from the administration. Those were our 2 big points. Those are the 2 big ones right there. We could see academic achievement and test scores go up if we enact these 2 policies.
All right, well, thank you for that, Caesar. I do want to get in a moment over to you, Christian, because I know mental health was a big topic in your room. But before we do, I want to see if Anna has anything she wants to add before I come back to you, Christian.
I definitely agree with both Aileen and Caesar. I feel like teachers right now are very frustrated, and I believe that they have every right to be because they've heard these broken promises countless times. And I know recently we call them giant iPads at our school, but the new line TVs that were given by the district, and teachers got upset by that. We get this technology that was given to every school for every classroom, maybe multiple per classroom, but there wasn't enough money to fund better equipment for labs. There wasn't enough money to better fund them. And I feel like that really broke some of the students' hearts. I know it broke mine, where these teachers are putting in their whole lives, where they'd stay after school for activities. They would do everything that they can to make our lives better, sometimes not spend time with their families because of that. But anytime that they're promised something, it seems like they're being taken away. And so many great teachers have moved on from teaching because they couldn't live that lifestyle anymore. And I think that's truly heartbreaking because the teachers are why we're here. We wouldn't be here in this interview right now without those teachers. And if they weren't there, like right now, like Miss Fishman is, like they know who Miss Fishman is. She's our Sun Youth Forum teacher, advisor. Without her, I wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have learned about everything that we're talking about right now. And I feel like that mentality is really heartbreaking, especially in a city as beautiful as Las Vegas. We make so much money in Las Vegas. We're seen as this wonderful city, but in the end, we're actually really troubled and really crippled in a way when it comes to our education system. So I just hope that one day the things can change.
Well, I appreciate all the perspectives and the honesty. We need to be having these conversations. I want to go over to you, Christian. I know we're changing the order a little bit, so you'll have to just indulge me, everybody, because I think another important thing to think about, right, is student mental health. And I feel like all the topics that we've discussed, from the education system to law and crime, drug use, substance abuse, homelessness, reproductive rights, I'm wondering, what's it like to be a young person at this moment in history? And to your point, mental health was a consistent theme in your room. How are students, let's not just talk about the issues, but how are students doing? How are students feeling?
Yeah, definitely. So as a room, as we enter, the room is called Teen Topics. One of the biggest things that I feel like every generation associates with teens is mental health. And that's because we're more open about it. Like, our generation is one of the generations where we talk about what's going on, not on just a local level, but on a state and national and even international level. The Internet of Things is creating even more connections between us across the globe, and because of that, we are all coming down to connect with that one issue that is mental health resources. And, to your point, or to your question about how are teens doing, not great. Teens are not doing good. And I smile because it's silly to me that this is still a problem that we have been facing. And one of the things is that it's not a new topic either. Mental health has been studied for years and years and years and years. it's just now it's not called crazy anymore. Now it's depression. Now it's anxiety. Now it's ADD. Now it's ADHD. All these things that are coming up, they're not points of insanity, right? Like, students are struggling, and the reason behind the fact that they are struggling starts with the education system. And, you know, a lot of people may argue that it is because, you know, their home lives are affected, all that stuff. But if you think about it, a student will spend 5 out of their 7 days at school. Some of us do a lot of extracurriculars. I stay at school for 8 to 9 hours a day, when normally this average student will stay 6 or 7. And, you know, that kind of thing means that school is your second home. Being at school is your second home. So why is your second home, where you spend the majority of your time at, making you feel less than, right? And so one of the things that we did definitely talk about was how to address mental health issues in schools, because we can do our best to, you know, educate parents and you know, families on a larger scale about what mental health means, you know, from a medical perspective, but also a psychological one in a more, you know, emotional kind of environment. But schools definitely can do a better job at addressing that. One of the big things that I was very proud of to announce in my room was that my school at Sierra Vista, we have something called the Zen Den. And the Zen Den is pretty much a place where students can come to that room. It's dark, dim lit. There's, you know, anti-anxiety kind of, it's an anti-anxiety environment. It's relaxing, you know, and many schools don't have infrastructure like that. My school is just now getting there, thanks to Ms. Siegel, who's one of our directors of that program. But there's a lot of schools that don't have it. You know, Southwest CTA, that's right across the street from us, has no mental health institutions like that, where students can actually, you know, feel heard and seen.
Well, I appreciate you opening up that dialogue. It's been a while since we've heard from Chanton, and I know that decriminalization of drugs was a topic in your room, and you had mentioned some of the challenges with mental health, et cetera. Do you want to make a connection there, or do you have another comment aside from that you want to make on student mental health?
I think I can do both of those. I think a lot of drug abuse, you know, is like, we do it because we don't feel okay, because the system that we have currently doesn't work for us, and because realistically it's hard to talk to our parents sometimes about like the things that we struggle with, right? It's like, there are legal drugs for depression, for anxiety, but it's about getting over that barrier of talking to my parent, of actually asking for that help. That's really, really difficult. And I think that mental health education is one way for us to actually get over that barrier, right? Feel comfortable with our parents, and have a lot of families who don't necessarily believe in mental health, help to educate them on it. I also think it's very stressful, not only with our education system, but with our economy, right? Inflation is constantly increasing. I don't see myself ever owning a home in this economy, right? It is so hard to get all the money, to get everything needed, to actually have a home, to start a family, to actually accomplish my dreams. And that's scary. I don't want to live a life where I'm just a worker. And like, seeing that that's my reality is absolutely horrifying. And I think like, it's awesome that like a Zen Den is there at your school. And like, my school has a counselor, like a therapist that's there. My school says that like mental health is important, but when we look at like what the schools are actually doing, they don't really care. My therapist at my school does absolutely nothing. She ignores students. And when I look at like my administration at my school, it's about getting those highest SAT scores. And realistically, I don't feel as if they care.
Let me ask really quickly, just by a show of hands, and then we'll get to other perspectives. One of the sort of sentiments that I'm hearing is sort of a anxiety about the future and maybe a lack of hope for the future. Is that accurate? Do you feel hopeful for the future?
No.
No? I feel like adults really need to hear that, because there's a lot of work we have to do. I see that you want to jump in, Kayla, and I know, Aileen, you want to jump in too. So you'll round us out on this discussion, and then we'll move to the other topics.
So when it comes to like mental health in school, I think one of the main problems is that students don't know a way to like take the stress off of them while they're at school. So we have a lot of people who have problems at home, because my school is mostly minority. It's mostly Hispanic, and then Black, and then everyone else. So we have a minority group, and we come to school, you know, a lot of them are doing drugs, a lot of them are doing that, a lot of them are skipping classes. What we try to do is implement new things, having them go to class, have these no walkout, no class, no go to class every day because we need this. But we're not really talking about how they feel about class. Is there a reason why they're not going to class? Is it because they don't feel safe in their classroom? Is it because we don't have the resources to help them feel safe in their classroom? Another problem is also learning how to deal with your counselors. Like there's certain counselors that don't really help you with your own mental health. They're more about grades. And coming from someone who has like really good grades, and I have my counselor who's always asking me about my grades, I've never been asked about how my day has been. I've never walked in there and felt like she understood that I wasn't having a good day. You know, I don't have that connection with my counselor. And I feel like if we have better connections to your counselor that isn't just with grades, it'd be so much better. Because we always struggle with, okay, we need to get the grade point average up, we need to get SAT scores up. But at the end of the day, we need to get people to want to get their grades up. As a top performing student in my school, I don't feel like I'm valued unless I have good grades. I'm in many AP classes, but at the same time, I don't feel like I have the best stress management. When it comes to being put in these classes, my counselor's like, oh, you can take another one. You want to join this class? And it's just, why aren't you asking about maybe how is this going to be stressful for you? Is this too much? You might maybe want to do this next year.
I just want to narrate for the audience that I see a lot of heads nodding. So you're striking a chord with your peers on what you're saying.
It's like the grade and the mental health. It's like grade should not be more than someone's mental health. You should care more about their mental health than what they're getting on their test. You know, of course, if we address the mental health first, then we can address the grades, and that'd be so much better.
Yeah. Well, a good friend of mine says we have to get young people turned on to living before we can get them turned on to learning, right? And so that's kind of the work we have before us. So we got to close out on this topic. I know it's an important one, so thank you, Christian, for setting us up for success. Aileen, let's hear from you on one of the topics that came up in your room that we've not yet discussed, which is the economy, which is sort of Chanton touched upon it, some of the economic prospects for the future, but specifically here in Nevada, what are some of the conversations people had about the economy?
So before I go into that, I want to acknowledge that my room did talk a lot about education as well as the homelessness crisis, because those are two things that are very, centered here in Nevada.
And your room was home in
Nevada, yes.
Okay. All right.
So my room was home in Nevada, and something that we talked about quite a lot was just how big of an industry casinos are and how our economy is so attached to tourism and the gaming industry. And something that we spent a lot of time on was not only security in casinos. It's on the day of filming, it's October 3rd, and it's 2 days after the anniversary of the October 1st shooting, which is something that we talked about in my room. So we talked about security in casinos, but then also how much responsibility does a casino have for gambling addiction, and how does that contribute to homelessness, and how can we diversify our economy from being just about tourism to maybe something else, because we were hit very hard during COVID when tourism took a hit.
All right, so we've heard from Aileen on a variety of topics that are important to home in Nevada, specifically the economy. What are some of the anxieties or hopes or feelings or attitudes or beliefs that young people have about the economy right now? Christian.
Yeah. When it comes to the economy, I know, like, as a teenager myself, and like, you were saying earlier, we don't see ourselves making money, and we don't see ourselves with the accessibility to use that money, or the intelligence to use that money, or the education on how to even access that money. Like I mentioned earlier, like a lot of the people that have graduated that I was good friends with don't know how to do taxes. Like as a student, it's very difficult to feel optimistic in a world where money's running out, and because that money's running out, everything's getting more expensive. Resources are running out, everything's getting more expensive. So at one point, there is a future that a lot of us have talked about, like in my room, we also talked about this. There's a future where everything could be desolate. We could all be what we call now homeless, but at that point it would just be societally accepted that there's not enough to go around, and because of that, it's hard to feel optimistic that whatever job you work, you're going to feel secure in that for a prolonged period of time. There are small, side hustles that people get all the time, like that, where they're making enough to sustain themselves, but it's more about people around, not just Vegas, but the country and the world are living to meet their ends, Okay. And because of that, it's not really fulfilling that sense of security as a person.
Okay. So what I heard now is that there's sort of a fear that there might not be enough for people to get ahead in life in the future. Is that sentiment shared across the six of you? Was it shared in your rooms? Are there other sentiments that were shared? Because I want to make sure we're having a balanced conversation here. So Aileen, go
I'm
ahead.
actually on the opposing side. So with inflation, it's that kind of there's too much money, so that's why everything's going up, because there's just more and more money that's being put in, and everyone has like too much, so it devalues everything. That's why we can't print more money to stop inflation or to just make everyone richer. But I don't agree that there won't be jobs or that there won't be enough resources. I think that we will have a surplus and extra. It just won't be available to everyone because we simply won't be able to afford it. And I know, especially with things like Airbnb or like a bunch of those hustle tips, especially that you see online and stuff, it's like landlords, and it's those specific situations where people who are already in positions of power, where they already have wealth, they are buying out other resources just so they can make their own wealth. Like a landlord would buy an entire complex of apartments and he wants to make a profit. So they're going to charge just a little bit extra. And then if enough people keep doing that, a little bit extra and a little bit extra and a little bit extra, it becomes unavailable to everyone else. So there's all these homes, but no one to fill them because no one can afford them, because there's someone behind the scenes who wants to make that money.
Okay, so we heard Aileen say there may continue to be money, but it may not be evenly spread or accessible to everybody. Are there other perspectives? I want to make sure we're going back here first before I come back to you. Yeah, Caesar, go ahead.
So I want to talk about how we are unable to spread our money equitably, but it also comes down to education. The more educated you are, the school that you went to is directly correlated to what school you went to, what your major was, how long were you in school, did you get a bachelor's, a master's, a doctorate. And there's something about Nevada that ultimately leaves students kind of pessimistic. And if there's one thing I know from every friend I've ever spoken to, it's just, man, I'm going to end up at UNLV. And it's not necessarily bad, but at the same time, it's problematic because it leaves them in Nevada. And opportunities will be taken away from us because we are stuck in Nevada. Most of our students don't get to leave. The high school education system simply isn't effective enough that most colleges don't want Nevadan students, since we're unable to achieve at a level others can. And it's created a competitive rat race where people start pushing each other over ledges so they can be club presidents or student council presidents. And now we're here where opportunities are dropping in Nevada, and we have to go to college.
Right.
In Nevada.
So what I'm hearing is it's about the fact that students don't have choices that ultimately is the problem. And that's created an environment of competition, which increases the anxiety because it doesn't feel like those opportunities to achieve and become educated and get ahead are available to everybody. Well, this has been a really important discussion, and everything continues to come back to education, it seems, even on this conversation about the economy. So if we were to reduce our fraction and find the common denominator, it seems like education is a major theme, regardless of what your room was that it came up. So we're going to zoom out and we're going to travel around the world. We've talked about Nevada, we've talked about America, law and crime, home in Nevada, teen topics, and school days. So let's go over to you, Anna, and let's talk about what's on young people's minds as it relates to international and global issues.
Well, as you can imagine, around the world, that was a lot of topics in a lot of different areas. There wasn't just one set mindset. Everyone had a different opinion on things. However, when you think about global problems, the first one people nowadays automatically think of is Russia versus Ukraine. And there are a lot of questions in between that, how much money we should spend on that, how we should spend our money, things like that. But one of the biggest questions was what would happen if Putin wasn't in power anymore? Would that ever happen willingly? Would that happen unwillingly? That idea of, would things continue? Would the war still continue? Would that hatred still continue? And our room was very split when it came to that question. A lot of people thought that, okay, well, if Putin was no longer in power, then everything would stop. However, I was on the side of, I don't think it would stop, because I feel like, just like we were talking about discrimination in our classes earlier, especially racism, that continued through generations because the previous generation had those same sentiments. So right now, those children who are growing up in those countries right now are sharing the sentiments as their parents because that's what they grew up with, not necessarily because they believe it themselves. And I'm not saying that's for everybody, but I believe that it will continue because of the sentiments that were from previous generations, especially now that it's been such a great amount of years that these issues have been happening. Also with the fact that Putin is not the only person who is doing what he's doing. There are so many other people in the background, so many other people in the government that have the same ideals as Putin. So I believe that even with him gone, that things would still continue. And another topic that we really discussed was African aid. A lot of people think of Africa as a very poor continent. There's no resources, things like that, but that's so not true. I grew up in Africa. I was from Addis Ababa, which is the capital of Ethiopia and is a flourishing city. And I feel like people don't see enough of that. All they think is desert, like Vegas, right? But Vegas is beautiful here. Everyone knows what Vegas is. But what type of aid should we offer African countries? Is it weaponry? Is it money, humanitarian things? Like, it can't just be the same for every single city, every single country, you know what I mean? And I feel like that was a really big discussion because there were a lot of students that thought money was going to solve the issue. And money, I don't believe, is going to solve the issue in most countries because that's not usually the problem. Sometimes it's politics. A lot of the times it's politics. But there are different ways that you can help a community. And I feel like that was a really big discussion.
All right, so we have heard about the conflict in Russia, or between Russia and Ukraine. We've talked about African aid, humanitarian, monetary, military, some of the perceptions globally that may not align with the reality. So let's hear from the group on any one of those topics. Let's start with you. Did you raise your hand?
Yeah. Okay, so African aid, I'm actually doing a research on this for AP Research. It's a topic that I'm very kind of a little bit educated in. I'm not completely, so excuse my ignorance. But in relations between Asian and African countries, which is my study, we see that China has done a lot to aid a lot of countries in Africa. I don't think Ethiopia was on there, but in Algeria, in Chad, in South Africa, there's a lot of aid going towards them. And it's not only just funding, like money. There's a lot of things where they're just having relations, but they're not interfering with how they run their country. And I think that type of aid is kind of needed. It's not to interfere, but it's also not to completely aid. It's to help them become a sustainable country by themselves. And we, going back a few years, we see that we've taken a lot from Africa to build our infrastructures in a lot of countries. And I think by the way that China had given their aid to them many years ago, and it's still going on, it's a good way to fundamentally develop Africa so we can have more developed countries in Africa. So I think if we think about how we're giving the aid, it's not just, of course, funding. It can have a better way and a better effect on African countries.
Well, I appreciate your point. And I want to point out that you named more countries in Africa than many adults could. Yeah. So let's go over to Chanton, who I see has his hand raised on this topic.
I think regarding Putin stepping down, I think I completely agree with you. I don't think anything would change at all. I don't think the issue is necessarily world leaders themselves. I think it's the competition between great powers, right? We have the United States, China, Russia, and other rising great powers competing against each other. We have our weapons held at each other's throats. And I think there's propaganda in all nations, right, that these other great powers are inherently evil, right? If we go back to the 50s, right, World War II or communist propaganda, right, we don't view them as people, we view them as enemies of the state, right? And so bringing down our weapons is the best way for us to solve these issues that we see internationally. And additionally, I think when it comes to African aid, I would agree, again, I think West Africa, I had no idea that it was so beautiful until I had to learn about it. And then I just saw that it was an industrialized, beautiful region it's really shocking to see when you realize that this is a region that's so beautiful. But regardless, I feel like just as in any other part of the world, aid is needed, right? And where I disagree is I feel like money is the best way to handle that, right? When we interfere too far in these nations, it becomes imperialism, right? It is about letting these nations have their own voices, right, as you said, but giving them the aid that they need. Adding on to what you said, China has a program where they'll give money specifically for infrastructure, right? It's a temporary loan, and if we implement a service like that, right, where we are willing to give these loans specifically for infrastructure, specifically so that it goes to the people and not to corrupt governments that can use the money and abuse it, we can best help these regions.
Well, again, a lot of really great discussion on this topic. And what I heard is that there's a narrative about an entire continent, and sometimes we have to have more nuance and be more educated about the challenges and the opportunities that the people of Africa face and the differences across those countries and those regions. And also that we need to ensure that more people understand the difference between humanitarian, military, economic aid so that people can become educated on this particular issue. And on the Ukraine-Russia issue, it sounds like there's consensus that regardless of who's in power, that maybe there are deeper challenges that would fuel that ongoing conflict. So we have run out of time on that topic. And at this point, we've heard from every room on their particular issues. So now we're going to take it to each of you to share a little bit and close out your perspectives. What I'm going to ask each of you to do is share one word of something that brings you hope for the future, and then one thing that causes you the most concern for the future. So who is the brave one that wants to kick us off? Aileen.
One thing that I think I can sum it up kind of in one word, ambition. It gives me both hope and fear for the future, because I know even here on this stage, we have student leaders and people who I know are going to be great people when they grow up. But then also you see something that we learn, especially in our AP government classes, like ambition can also be the seeds of corruption. But ambition can also be what motivates good people to keep doing good.
Well, there were a lot of hyphens in that one word, Aileen. So we're going to turn it over to Christian to go next.
I think the word that gives me hope is passion, and something that scares me is greed.
Okay, Kayla?
Mine's is 2 words, but it's international relationships. That's what it gives me hope, is more foundation on international relationships. And something that doesn't give me hope is the economy.
Okay. Chanton, what about you?
I think something that gives me hope is democracy, just the belief that we together can make change. And then something that I think definitely like scares me is selfishness.
Okay. Anna?
I think that something that gives me hope is mindset, because I think that a positive mindset can change everything. And honestly, one of the scariest things for me is politics.
Politics. Okay. Caesar?
I'd say the word that gives me hope is riot. The idea that, even if it's a little contrasting from Aileen, that not that necessarily leaders will make change, but that people will, by going out into the streets and making their voices heard. And the word that actually gives me the most fear is ambition. That we will become so intertwined with ourselves and not thinking about others that we will go to any length to achieve whatever we want, not what anybody else wants.
Well, I appreciate you all sharing what gives you hope, also what you're afraid of. I think it's important for your peers to hear that, but also the leaders that are elected today to understand what's on the minds of young people. I do just want to say one reflection is that although there is a sentiment of anxiety about the future, given all of the issues we face, I hope that each of you look to each other and after hearing each other speak today, feel a little more hopeful, because you will be the ones that are shaping these choices. And you all see the issues very clearly, and I think that that is a reason to be hopeful. So to close, I want to say thank you for tuning in to our Sun Youth Forum panel discussion. It's been another amazing year with some challenges as well, as we have heard, to getting to talk with some very inspirational students. We look forward to seeing you again next year.